Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 7, at least last I checked. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague and co-host on this magical mystery tour, Payne Insider. Payne, it's another week of the National Football League for us, my friend.
Just running the math here. After 6 losers, week 7 then comes.
Yep, that's
I believe
typically how it works.
Does that math check out for you?
It does check out, but you are a man who doesn't necessarily have a lot of superstitions, but you are big on the number 7, so this is going to be where the magic happens, right?
Here we go.
All
yes, right. Yes. Yeah. Great name for a child, I'm told.
Especially if you're a Yankee fan this postseason, to try and be able to go in that particular direction. But we have a couple of games to get to, and we got started a little bit later than normal this morning as you and I deliberated with all the injuries that are impacting some of the markets, and most notably the Thursday night football game, which will kick things off between the Denver Broncos and the New Orleans Saints. When we look at this particular matchup, I mean, Denver comes in relatively healthy, minus Patrick Surtain. New Orleans will get through the laundry list, but there's a reason that the Broncos are road favorites on a short week with a rookie quarterback and a total of 37. It's the Sean Payton homecoming, first game against his former team, seeking to become the 7th head coach to defeat all 32 current franchises in the NFL with a win this week. The Saints, meanwhile, became the 3rd team in NFL history, win their first 2 games of the season by 20-plus points, then lose the next 4, joining the 1965 Dallas Cowboys, and I had to double-check this, the 1921 Cleveland Indians, not those Cleveland Indians, but the football variety, with their defeat last week in Tampa. Cluster injuries, Payne, it is always an industry buzzword, but when the entire roster is injured, like it is for the Saints this week, tough to try and quantify the impact, being down a starting quarterback, your top 2 wide receivers, 37 members of the offensive line, banged up in the backfield, banged up on the defensive side of the ball. X's and O's are one thing, but when we go through a game like this, how difficult is it to try and assess the quantitative value of the players that are out for a particular team?
The Saints' injuries are as bad as your pronunciation of New Orleans. It's that bad.
New Orleans. I don't even know the official pronunciation. I mean, our listeners are going to correct me when I mispronounce names of players, coaches, offensive linemen, since I do that on a repetitive basis. I try to at least get the cities right, and I better learn it by the time I have to go down there for Super Bowl this year.
That's right. You are going down there. That is official. I'm not going to be joining you this year. At least as of now, I'm going down. That may be subject to change. Yeah, I'm not going to be making that trek this year. I think for me, it's Super Bowl. It's either got to be in Miami or it's in Vegas. Those are the only 2 I'm going to.
That's fair. I always had you pegged as a big Indianapolis guy.
There needs to be enough hotel rooms and enough places to eat to where, the city's got to be big enough and vibrant enough to be able to host.
Big cities for big personalities. It's the only way it works for Payne Insider.
You're such a dick. So getting on track here, far and away the largest factor at this point is price, and it's been market entry. Sunday night, Monday morning, and into the early evening Monday, you could have grabbed a plus sign in front of Denver, and the volume of injuries to key players for the Saints has piled up, as you alluded to. And I think we discussed some of those ahead of the Chiefs game, specifically along the offensive line, with Eric McCoy going on IR after the groin surgery and Cesar Ruiz out again with the knee injury. Lucas Patrick still questionable. Derek Carr obviously gets injured in that game. Spencer Rattler starts against the Buccaneers and had the worst completion rate relative to expectation of any Week 6 quarterback. It was 13% below expectation. And I think the one thing to remember here is that Rattler was running with the 3rd team in camp, and during the initial part of the season, it was Jake Haener who backed up Carr against the Chiefs. So it's not like Rattler's been getting a ton of reps in this offense, in this system since he joined the Saints, and now in a short week, Rattler doesn't have his top 2 pass catchers in Olave and Shaheed. Taysom Hill has been listed as doubtful as well, so you don't get that Swiss Army knife added back to the offense. Kamara is battling through what feels like 37 injuries on a short week. The Broncos defense, number 1 in pass rush win rate. They don't blitz a ton. It's not a great recipe for a rookie quarterback without key cogs up front. It's also the 3rd game in 11 days for the Saints.
We saw how well it worked out for the Seahawks.
In your mind, you say all that, and you're like, oh, this sounds easy. But the conversation changes because of current price. It's now Denver minus 3.5, a 4.5-point adjustment from the opener Sunday night. Patrick Surtain Jr., arguably the best cover corner in the league, is out with a concussion. And so the other side of the equation is on a short week on the road. Do you want to be laying points with Bo Nix needing to win the game by more than field goal? And, if you remove garbage time from all of the qualifying quarterbacks this season, Bo Nix has a success rate of 27%, right? He has been the garbage time king. We saw it last week against the Chargers, just racking up meaningless production when the game's already out of reach. Every time Bo Nix has been under center and the game is not in garbage time, he's delivered a successful play for the Broncos offense 27% of the time. And just for context, that's the worst mark of any quarterback with at least 100 snaps. It's the worst mark by 7%. 7% worse than Deshaun Watson, 10% worse than Will Levis, 11% worse than Trevor Lawrence, 15% worse than Gardner Minshew, 19% worse than Justin Fields. Like, he has been diabolically bad. And so Denver could very well go out, win this game by multiple scores. The market hasn't adjusted enough. And after the fact, you'll feel good about that. But in the world we live in, right, where you're betting before you know the result and you can't play Monday morning quarterback,
that's
it's just
not
tough
true.
to justify.
People do that all the time in this business. Everybody has the winners when they know the results.
It's tough to justify laying 3 at this point when the Buccaneers laid 3.5 4 days ago, and this is the common opponent where the Broncos were catching 6.5 against the Buccaneers without Vita Vea and Antoine Winfield Jr. So we've started to kind of see, at the places that were offering 3 flat on this game, a little bit of buyback for New Orleans. I'm not saying that's me. I'm probably just staying far away. I don't know if I can get involved even at 3 flat.
It ain't
on the
for
Saints,
me, that's for sure. To back New Orleans after watching them last week in terms of going out there and operating. With the Patrick Surtain being out, I'm not sure it's a disadvantage for Denver, where normally you make a major adjustment for being down one of the top cover corners in the league.
So that's kind of the conversation around this game. It's more price. It's more market entry than it is X's and O's and matchups. But, maybe Bo Nix thrives here. He'll be able to get the run game going with his legs. We saw Baker Mayfield blow through his rushing prop number. We saw 2 backs in
Sean Tucker and Bucky Irving are still running through that Saints defense.
Very efficient last week. Now, the Broncos haven't been overly efficient running the ball. Their best game was against Tampa Bay without Vita Vea in the middle. So, but everyone's been running on the Saints, especially with some of those defensive injuries that are also starting to pile up on that side of the ball. It's just for me at this point, and when we're having the conversation at a I would say the widely available number at 2.8. So it's mostly 3 even. It's just a little bit of a different conversation than if we were having it at plus 1.5 or 1 or, a money line minus 0.5, something in that range. Just it's changed. Now, there's a couple spots out there. It's certainly not a widely available number that might have a semi-appealing money line still in Denver out there.
That is a very fair assessment. When you look at the Saints as currently constructed, I don't think it's a leap of faith by any stretch of the imagination to say they're going into battle tonight with a roster that would be outside the top 30 in the league in terms of overall talent. Difference makers on both sides of the ball. But to your point, Bo Nix hasn't exactly been of the same caliber of those other rookie quarterbacks, and we've seen Jane Daniels go out there and perform along with Caleb Williams.
Dennis Allen going against Daddy as well.
Vance Joseph coordinating the defense as well for the Denver Broncos against a rookie quarterback on a short week. So all things working against Bo Nix work against the Saints. Maybe with Derek Carr, it's a much different dynamic we're talking about here.
We also saw the Saints last year on that short week Thursday game where they were backed by a lot of professionals.
I was one of them and never had a chance.
A lot of the great nucleus of the Jacksonville Jaguars with a hobbled less than 100% Trevor Lawrence went in there and just smacked the shit out of Dennis Allen. So, some certainly questionable attributes as a coach. My guess is this will be his last hoorah as a head coach in the NFL.
From the penthouse to the outhouse in the span of just a handful of weeks in the NFL after the Saints started off like a house on fire. Into Sunday's slate we go, and normally we would kick things off with that early morning.
That's a good transition there, Toddy.
Early morning game in lovely England, but we're skipping past that. The Jacksonville Jaguars and the New England Patriots, not a game that's worthy of a big game breakdown on this fine program. So, Payne, we're going to Lambeau Field for Green Bay playing host.
Scene of the crime. You're not trying to piss people off there.
Trying to piss people off where?
Going back to the scene of the crime.
No, yeah, we don't need. Well, it's a different scene technically. They're not playing at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, so
Wembley.
They're going to Wembley for a different surface, different conditions, and weather that has impacted that total as we record here on a Thursday morning. Lambeau.
I figured you're going to make a case for Jacksonville this week.
You really want to go there. You really want to. You really want to play this game.
I mean, what I can say is. We will not be giving out Jacksonville on this podcast. Jacksonville will not be moving 4 points in our favor this week either if we were to bet them.
No.
On to a very, very fun game. Probably the best game. Well, I wouldn't say the most intriguing game that I think is on the card this week.
One of them. There is no doubt about it. We have a couple of marquee matchups that'll be fun watches, and this one will start things in Green Bay, where it is the Green Bay Packers, a 2.5-point favorite, soft 3. We'll call it 2 3/4 for argument's sake. Total at 47.5 as they'll welcome in the Houston Texans. First career matchup between C.J. Stroud and Jordan Love, who actually posted identical stat lines in their playoff debuts last year. This is a Houston Texans team who has thrived under C.J. Stroud in a limited sample size when they're catching points. A far cry from how they've performed when you're expecting Houston to go out there and win by margin last week in their 40-plus point outburst against the New England Patriots notwithstanding. Payne, when we begin to assess the Green Bay Packers, Jordan Love is tied for the NFL lead in passing touchdowns over the last 2 seasons with Dak Prescott. He's been pressured more often in the last 12 games than a lot of quarterbacks in the league, but for whatever reason, whether it's attributes, luck, or overall shiftiness in the pocket, Love has found a way to be able to evade that pass rush against the Houston Texans, who are going to try and pin their ears back playing on a little bit of an unfamiliar surface. Their first game on grass so far this season. Green Bay's offense against the Houston Texans defense. Who do you give an edge to, and which matchup are you most intrigued to see unfold Sunday afternoon?
Yeah, this is a real test for the Packers offense that you kind of want to see them ace if you're going to give them that boost into the upper echelon of the NFL. Green Bay, youngest team in the league, super talented, obviously, but inherently that's come with large swings in performance, and that's what we've seen to this point. You can't outscore the Eagles in the opener. Everyone steps up with a backup QB weeks 2 and 3. Jordan Love returns, and the Packers dropped that division matchup to Minnesota week 4, and the offense finished 29th in EPA per play in non-garbage time situations. So, okay, Jordan Love wasn't 100%, still getting comfortable with the knee, and you have a prime spot the following week against a Rams defense 30th in efficiency, and Green Bay's offense has an output that was kind of just middling. And then you get the horrific Cardinals defense last week, a dome team. Certainly looked better, but I just don't know where we are exactly in terms of consistency. The Texans defense is certainly a big step up in class for the Packers. Down to down, Houston's made it really difficult for opponents. Teams are completing a league low 53% of their passes, but when you get Houston, it's typically the larger impact plays, and that's where the Packers have thrived, right? They're hitting those large impact plays. You kind of hinted at and set me up where we can discuss some pressure, and I think that's massive on this side of the matchup. It's very clear defenses are better when they generate it, and offenses are better when they negate it. But we're now able to judge how large the deltas are, how sensitive players are and units are to pressure. The Texans right now, 4th in pass rush win rate. when they get pressure on quarterbacks and make them uncomfortable, Houston is top 3 in virtually every meaningful defensive metric. Quarterbacks are completing 29% of throws when Houston gets pressure. Jordan Love's delta is massive. Now, he's done a good job, despite battling through this knee injury, avoiding pressure, to your point. The sack avoidance rate is through the roof. Just a 7% sack rate when he's pressured, so doing a good job. Now, when he's avoided it and then actually gotten rid of it, that part's left a little bit to be desired. Bottom 5 QB in most meaningful metrics when pressured. Love has also struggled against the blitz to this point in the season. Now, the sample size is small, and he was very good handling blitz last season, so you're hoping that regresses to the positive. You wonder if the Packers' offensive line can hold up in this spot. Zach Tom has been an absolute monster. Walker and Jenkins have been better in pass protection. Jenkins dealing with a little bit of an injury, but this side of the matchup has a lot of variance for him based on pressure, right? Houston, though, has a wide range of opinions, which makes this game somewhat interesting to me, right? I mean, one of the more polarizing teams, not necessarily from how you would think of that word, right? But just when I discuss Houston with a lot of guys that I respect, the response back is just wildly different. So it doesn't surprise me that this game's bouncing back and forth around that 3. Some guys I respect have the Texans a below average team without Nico Collins. Others feel Houston is clearly a top 10 team.
Pretty impressive, actually. Hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, others still feel Houston is clearly a top 10 team. So for me, this is probably the most intriguing game of the weekend because these are two teams that are trying to join that upper echelon of the NFL, and they're not quite there yet from a power ratings perspective, how we think about them in the landscape of the Super Bowl conversation right now. That can obviously change, especially when you have a young team like the Packers who could potentially be on the ascend, right? And they have a ceiling that we don't quite know how high that is, right? Because you have a new defensive coordinator as well, and we can get to that side of the ball in a minute, but you have this new defensive coordinator, and his system's being implemented, and his guys are starting to learn that on the fly. At the same time, the offense is super young and can reach a point that, the current power rating might not know is possible. So that's, I think, what's potentially intriguing about the Packers as we zoom out and the season moves forward.
Well, you mentioned the Packers and their new defensive coordinator. Jeff Hafley has the defense taking the ball away effectively, and that has been the saving grace for a Green Bay defense that if you look at their counting stats through this point of the season compared to where it was last year, that's the only metric that's different. Yards per play about the same, total yards per game, and some of the other aspects. Xavier McKinney has played a big role in that, leading the NFL with 5 interceptions this season. Had an interception in each of the first 5 games before coming away with 0 picks against the Arizona Cardinals. In steps a Houston Texans offense that you mentioned, not having the services of Nico Collins, a game-breaking wide receiver that gives them a bona fide vertical threat. A little bit more methodical with Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell as their 1-2. We saw Dalton Schultz get a little bit more involved in the offense last week against New England, maybe not quite enough to our liking. But when we see the Houston Texans and what they're doing on the ground, clearly Joe Mixon also gives them a different element as they were able to show a little bit more balance that can challenge this Green Bay defense that has shown flashes but seems to rely a lot more on the splash play than anything else through this portion of the season.
Listen, I think Hafley is a much better defensive coordinator than what was previously in Green Bay, and it's going to take some time
a hell of a drug.
The scheme is vastly different than it was a season ago, but I think you made a great point in quantifying the turnovers. If you look at Green Bay defensively, 7th in EPA per play allowed with the turnovers. If you remove those and just look on a down-to-down basis, 20th in EPA per play. So, if the turnovers aren't quite there, it's more of a middling, slightly below average Packers defense to this point. I know we touched on the game briefly Monday, and to me, certainly everyone's going to be looking at the game we discussed later with 49ers and Chiefs, a Super Bowl matchup. But to me, this is the one that I think we learn a little bit more. It's really the Spider-Man meme pointing at each other, but there's 4 Spider-Mans in this version of it, right? It's LaFleur and Slowick, Halfley and D'Amico. All 4 are from the Shanahan tree, so there's just so much familiarity here. I'll get to C.J. Stroud in the Texans pass game in a moment, but it's the run game that you hit on there that I think determines the fate of this side of the matchup. Joe Mixon's back, and apparently he's found the fountain of youth. I don't know if it's the uniform, but Mixon looks like he's in the best shape of his life, and he's kind of taken to Bobby Slowick's zone run scheme.
I have to imagine when you get cut by the team that drafts you, it lights a little bit of a fire under your ass when you go into the twilight of your career, too.
My guess is if the off-field stuff was a little cleaner, they probably would have kept them around.
That makes sense. That makes sense. He created a lot of his shitstorm that he had to deal with through a ton of what we'll call poor off-field judgment, to say the least.
On the field, Mixon's averaging 1.3 yards per rush attempt over expectation. That's the 7th best mark among qualifying running backs through 6 weeks so far. So, he's hit that fountain of youth, as I mentioned. And the Packers defense has struggled to stop the run. Now, the run schedule for Green Bay has been difficult, no doubt. But Green Bay's 28th in rushing success rate allowed. Nearly 31% of rush attempts against the Packers have gone for a first down or a touchdown. We have to monitor the status of Wyatt and Wooden in the middle of that Packers defense. Wyatt hasn't played since week 4 with an ankle injury. It was a DNP on Wednesday. Wooden left the Cardinals game with an undisclosed injury, did not practice Wednesday. If those two can't go, there's only 3 defensive tackles on the current Packers roster, and Kenny Clark is playing through a toe injury, and TJ Slayton has been on a snap count limit so far this season. So the interior of that defensive line for the Packers is a little bit dinged up right now. So if the Texans can run it, I think it certainly helps Stroud open some things up for the Texans pass game. It'll help slow down the Packers' pass rush. The Texans have had trouble protecting, 26th in pass block win rate. You have an all-world left tackle in Laramie Tunsil, who's battling through some injuries at the moment. Green Bay plays lots of man coverage under Halfley. C.J. Stroud's been better against zone coverage, worse against man. Jair Alexander, one of the league's best cover corners, returned last week. Was a little bit of a surprise with that groin injury playing on a wet surface, but he was a go. Nico Collins on IR. In the 6 quarters without Nico Collins so far, the Texans offense has a 37% success rate the last 2 weeks. If you zoom out, use a larger sample size, we've now eclipsed 250 snaps of C.J. Stroud without Nico Collins on the field. Stroud's completion rates dip nearly 7%, touchdown rate falls nearly 2%, passer rating drops 15 points. This is also a great call by you, the first grass surface game of the season for the Texans offense, right? It's a little bit different when you have, the Tank Dells of the world, and obviously previously Nico Collins, and a lot of things you're doing is speed concepts with outside zone, and now you go from the fast turf to a very choppy grass surface. It does play a little bit of a role here, so something to think about. But if the Texans can be efficient on the ground, it certainly gives their offense a fighting chance here without Nico Collins.
We think the battle continues between the 2.5 and 3 up until kickoff on Sunday.
It's a good question. Put me on the spot here. I kind of feel like the injury report for some of those Green Bay defenders will determine whether this goes to 3 flat or ticks back down to 2.5. I also think that probably plays a role on where this total goes. I'll just be honest. Our model shot out a little bit lower of a number here, so I'm not surprised that 48 got hit under a little bit. But when we got to 46.5, there was some buys back to 47.5 on Monday morning. So I'm not 100% certain where this goes based upon some of the injuries that are floating around out there for both sides, along with that discrepancy and what I discussed earlier on how a couple of these groups view the Houston Texans. So yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. Usually I'll know where all these things are going, but man, it just feels like right now that right number is like 2.8. I feel like if you got to 3 on Houston and some of those defenders are out for Green Bay inside, you'd probably see a buy on the Texans.
Makes a world of sense. And you mentioned some of the Texans' struggles offensively. You dig into the box scores of the opponents that they've faced so far this year. The offense can look great for stretches, but has a penchant for bogging down. They just haven't been seamless. And one thing that we didn't even address at the top, the level of familiarity between play callers and offensive philosophies, both coming from that Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. Bobby Slowick on one side, Matt LaFleur on the other. Two teams both outside the top 20 in terms of pace. Should be a fascinating game to watch, knowing that...
For our listeners, that is completely on me. That's when I had Todd on mute. We did discuss that at the top, but you were on mute.
My apologies. Usually the best way.
Not your apologies. My apologies.
To take me in. So
you don't get a... you would clearly get a little note there about, hey, fucking listen already.
I get notes on a lot of things from our listeners on a variety of topics. One NFC...
Very passionate listeners.
That they are, and that's why we love them oh so much. From one NFC North venue to another, but this a divisional matchup between the Detroit Lions and the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota, a 1.5 point favorite as they'll play host to Detroit, coming off of the bye. Detroit, the total on this thing, 50.5. There are some 51s out there as well. The Lions had their bye, and they looked refreshed and energized going up against the JV defense of the Dallas Cowboys en route to rolling up 47 points, exacting a measure of revenge from last year's standalone game on a Saturday night. The Lions have now won 3 of the last 4 meetings between these two franchises. It, however, is the first time since 2000 that both teams will enter the game between them both with a record 4+ games over 500. The starting quarterbacks back then on that fateful day, Dante Culpepper donning Vikings purple, and Charlie Batch in the Honolulu Blues. The Vikings, their undefeated record, Payne, it hasn't been smoke and mirrors. They've trailed for a grand total of 3 minutes and 26 seconds so far this season. The 5th fewest minutes trailing by any team through 5 games since 1970. The other 5 teams on the top 6 of this list all went on to make the Super Bowl. 4th team in the Super Bowl era to win 4 straight games, all without trailing, all coming against opponents that had a record of 500 or better entering that contest. But as far as this Lions team, they have made people a lot of money over the last handful of years with Jared Goff and Dan Campbell. Lions 21-9 against the number as underdogs, including 9-1 against the number the last 10 times that they've been dogs, having covered 7 straight versus the Minnesota Vikings. So a lot at stake in that particular regard. And while I kind of led you in one direction when we broke down the Houston Texans and the Green Bay Packers, I'll leave it up to you in terms of what side of the ball you want to start on, whether it's Sam Darnold and a rested Vikings offense, potentially without Aaron Jones, against the Detroit defense that's going to look different without Aiden Hutchinson, or a step up in class for Jared Goff and a Lions offense who will find it significantly more difficult, at least in theory, navigating against this Brian Flores Vikings defense than what Detroit has had to deal with in their last 2 games, hanging north of 40 in each of those contests.
That's the very fun part of this matchup for me, and that there's a little bit of a wide range here. Detroit had success in the 2 matchups against Flores last season, but they were late in the year. It was actually week 16 and 18, and the Vikings at that point had been decimated by injury. Minnesota actually ranked 31st in D-line health. So this is certainly a different conversation as we fast forward a season, and the Goff versus Flores battle, I think, looks a little bit different this go-around. Massive step up in class, to your point, this week for Detroit's offense. They've played defenses so far of the Rams, who were 30th in efficiency, and their top cover corner was down. The Cowboys, 27th in defensive efficiency, and multiple starters were out. Cardinals, 23rd, Seahawks, 19th, and down their entire starting defensive line. And now you get the number 1 ranked defense in the Vikings in their home building with Flores having multiple weeks to prepare. And so that's the ultimate cat and mouse in this game of Brian Flores and Jared Goff and some of the blitz rates that we know are potentially coming. I would bet large money the blitz rates are going to be lower than last year because all those guys were dinged up, and it was really the only prayer Minnesota had. But if you can believe it, Brian Flores sent blitz in the 2 matchups last season a combined 73% of the time versus Goff.
Backyard and football, just the way I like
it. That's how he had to do it. I mean, they were just so beat up. And so when the blitz got home, per usual, Goff struggled under pressure, but because the Lions' offensive line is so good, pressure didn't happen enough, and Goff absolutely nuked the Vikings defense and made Flores pay when he sent heat and didn't get home. He completed 90% of his passes for about 10 yards per pass attempt, and the sample size of that was nearly 50 passes. So this season, Goff has been better against man coverage than zone. Vikings play gobs of zone, specifically too high. The splits have been quite large. Goff has been QB number 2 in EPA when he doesn't face too high, number 22 when he does. That's the Vikings' most used zone coverage concept. The Lions have also been fantastic throwing short and letting their playmakers do the rest. The Vikings are number 1 defending throws less than 15 air yards. Vikings do a great job stopping explosive runs, number 1 in yards per rush before first contact. It's very difficult to stop that Lions O-line from getting pushed, especially with Gibbs and Montgomery being so efficient, but there's likely far more resistance this week than against Seattle's defensive line without all 4 starters and the Cowboys front missing 3 defensive starters as well here, Todd. So I think this looks, if you're going into this matchup, and certainly Flores is going to send blitz, and a couple times that great offensive line of the Lions is going to protect it up, and Goff's going to have opportunities here. It's just going to look vastly different than the 2 matchups last season in my mind, and a significant step up in class for the Lions.
How much do you downgrade the Detroit Lions defensively when they don't have a player on the roster that's even capable of coming close to replacing some of the production they lose with the injury to Aiden Hutchinson, who currently led the NFL in pressures at 45, sacks 7.5, and quarterback hits at 17. Marcus Davenport was brought in before the season started to try and provide a bookend pass rusher, as we know to always be the case with Marcus Davenport. You bet over under 2.5 games and typically can catch that under before the calendar goes from September to October. What does Detroit have to do to change up their defensive philosophy to make sure that they're not putting their defensive backs in a difficult spot, knowing that that's a position group we thought could improve as the season progressed under the tutelage of Aaron Glenn, but still very raw and inexperienced outside of Brian Branch?
Yeah, the obvious is that Aiden Hutchinson is a massive loss, that he's responsible for 50% of all the team sacks, and he ranked number 1 in pass rush win rate among qualifying edge rushers. The other side of that coin, for those attempting to devalue Aiden Hutchinson a little bit, is your rebuttal would be he's played nothing but a bunch of backup tackles throughout the course of this season, which is accurate. And even with him, the Lions defense is 30th in pressure rate as a team and 27th in pressure rate over expectation. So, how far can the dip possibly be? Moving forward, there won't be the fortune of playing gobs of backup linemen. I don't think. You wouldn't anticipate it at this rate. The real problem with the Lions losing Hutch is I think the second part of what you mentioned is the fact that the D-line was decimated by injury prior to Hutch going down. Derek Barnes is, an outside linebacker, but would kind of operate as that 5th guy in the 5 down fronts that Aaron Glenn liked to play, so he'd line up on the edge. He's on IR. Marcus Davenport, he mentioned, was kind of that boom or bust signing. He's out. He was the guy that was starting opposite Hutch. He's on IR with that tricep injury. Before the season started, John Kaminsky was that 3rd guy in the edge rotation. He had a knee procedure. He has not played a snap yet this season. So
the only winner in all this is Ali McNeil, who gets life-changing money as a result of all of it.
So it's bleak because it's not just Aiden Hutchinson, it's the rest of that group as well. And there'd been some conversations about leveraging the future and going out and getting a Max Crosby. We'll see if that ultimately unfolds. And I kind of lead with that because, listen, it's the obvious on this side of the ball in terms of Hutch's importance and the injury. But it's also important, I think, a little bit more underlying because Sam Darnold has been the most sensitive quarterback to pressure in the NFL through 6 weeks. If the Vikings offense has been this good with Darnold struggling under pressure, I don't see a world where he's all that uncomfortable this week. And I would expect, or at least if I put myself in Aaron Glenn's brain, I think he maybe sends more blitzes. They're currently 12th in the league in blitz rate. It probably is going to open up more things in the secondary The Vikings are third in EPA when blitzed, so they torch you if you send blitz. Darnold, much better against man than zone. Lions play gobs of man. Lions are below average defending play action on early downs. The Vikings like to spam it on early downs. You kind of look at Darnold. He's been electric throwing with play action. So I think there's some interesting matchups here. You also have to keep your eyes on Brian Branch and Carlton Davis in the back end of that Lions defense. It was at least good to see Branch get a light practice in there, but two guys that are battling through some things there. Where maybe the issues could rise for this Vikings offense is the run game was absolutely anemic without Aaron Jones. We've kind of just been banging this table for multiple years on that gentleman's impact. And Ty Chandler was abysmal trying to close out that Jets game. Jones has come out and said he's unsure if he can play. You follow some of the tea leaves, trading for Cam Akers. I would say more unlikely than likely for Aaron Jones at this point, but certainly today's the big day. If I'm Aaron Glenn and I'm looking for a chance in this game, I'm probably sitting back in zone because that's where Darnold's been a little bit worse, and I'm not blitzing. If you can't get pressure anyways, might as well not leave yourself exposed in the back. And so that would kind of be my approach here if I was Aaron Glenn game planning this thing out. And I would lean on, my guys in that front to try to stop the run naturally, knowing that if it's not Aaron Jones, it's been a lot less efficient. So that would be the kind of path I would take if I was the Lions on defense.
Side kind of hanging out in no man's land with the Vikings, fluctuating from a 1.5, upwards of 2.5. The total did open
Detroit got hit a little bit yesterday.
It did. They were 2.5, kind of turned into 1.5s and 1s, although a prominent offshore shop has decided the hell with it. We're going to sit at 2.5 and just juice the shit out of it instead of actually moving.
Yeah.
Total-wise, 48.5, opener 51, but we've seen a little bit of buyback. All about the price point, in your opinion there?
Yeah. 51 is 51's a key number in the NFL, and as scoring starts to rise a little bit the last few weeks, I think maybe there will be less temptation from some groups who just kind of blanketing any total that had a 5 in front of it and going under. Maybe the last few weeks' results will keep them from doing that here, but as you said, the sharper spot in the market still dangling a 51 there at a very reasonable price. So I'll be intrigued to see where this goes. Certainly, the Aaron Jones announcement could impact the total here a bit. So, and I do think, as we mentioned, Detroit stepping up in class on offense a little bit and just a much healthier, different Vikings defense.
You mentioned I'm drawing a blank here, so I don't even know where I'm going with this. This is what happens when you get into the portion of the season. I had a follow-up question that eludes me if it comes back and I get hit by a bus. I'll find a way to try and incorporate it. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for all things podcast related, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And again, subscribe to the Bet the Board podcast newsletter. Check those spam filters. Make sure that you recognize the address that it's coming from. We know there was a lot of feedback on social media from folks who are unable to access that. Try and do everything we can, and we'll do everything in our power to try and walk you through to the best of our abilities.
When you sign up, you will typically get an email from from our provider effectively saying, opt in. So just signing up doesn't end the process. You got to go into the email, actually opt in. This day and age, it's getting very difficult with both text and email with all the spam stuff going on. So it's always best as well as if you mark the email address as a safe sender, bettheboardpodcast@gmail.com, because that's where it comes from. As Todd alluded to, check some of those spam filters. There's like 87 different folders now in Gmail accounts. I also, and this isn't to be a dick, I would enter the year 2024 with some of the email addresses, right? The MSNs, the bellsouth.nets, the .edus. They have a much lower...
Look at you taking shots at academia over there.
Acceptance rates than Gmails, right? That's just the reality of the situation. So if you have one of those ancient email addresses, it probably makes sense to fire up a Gmail account and then try to resubscribe from there as well.
Smart way to try and go about approaching it to make sure that you can have all of that information readily accessible. You mentioned text message. I think I got 37 about buying liquor this week and Halloween costumes. I'm not sure I'll go after either of those.
Election season, right? The stuff you have to go through these days to actually be able to send text to people, you would be surprised by. Like, there's a new law that was enacted where you actually have to provide a Social Security number or a business EIN number to even set up a text account these days. So you got to go through some loops to send these things out. So it makes it more difficult when guys are actually sending out things people want. But that's just kind of the way we are right now in this current space.
For sure. Sunday afternoon, the Super Bowl rematch, Payne. Kansas City in the Bay Area, fresh off a bye. San Francisco comes in off a mini bye in their own right, having defeated the Seattle Seahawks last Thursday night. 49ers, a 1-point prevailing favorite. There are some 1.5s out there. Total on this game as high as 47.5, as low as 46.5. When we try and assess where this market will go. 10th Super Bowl rematch in the following season. Super Bowl winner, 6-3. What does that mean for this game? Absolutely nothing. Just a fun nugget I thought I'd share. 11 straight wins for the Kansas City Chiefs, including the playoffs.
Bringing the fire.
It's the second longest win streak under Andy Reid. Brock Purdy, Patrick Mahomes, they rank 1-2 in teams' points per game among starting quarterbacks since 1950 with a minimum of 25 starts under their belt. And we're going to hear it from now until the cows come home and kick off Sunday afternoon. Patrick Mahomes as an underdog will be the storyline that people want to try and follow. And it's warranted. The best straight-up record, ATS record, most passing yards of any quarterback as a dog since 1970 with a minimum of 10 starts. It does come with a caveat, though. The last time Mahomes was a regular season underdog, Week 6 back in 2022. What happened in that game? The Kansas City Chiefs lost 24-20 against the Buffalo Bills. The 49ers, Kyle Shanahan, he's come under scrutiny, and rightfully so, given how his teams have performed in one-score games. Hasn't been great by any stretch of the imagination. Injury-wise for the 49ers, a couple of key players were missing from practice on Wednesday. Jawan Jennings and Malik Collins registered DNP. Deebo Samuel dealing with a bit of a wrist injury. As far as the Chiefs are concerned, Mike Dana, the only name of note along that Chiefs defensive line. Still notable and important as it's not a position that they have a ton of depth. Similar to what we did in the game prior, Payne, with so much at stake, trying to assess offense versus defense. In this game, I feel it's only logical that we start with Patrick Mahomes against a 49ers defense and how creative the Chiefs can get, knowing that they're limited with weapons, but there are a couple paths for players like a Travis Kelce to have a big day against a 49ers defense that's really struggled to take away opposing tight ends.
You never want to underestimate Reid and Mahomes, and I don't think the public necessarily will as a dog. There aren't a ton of paths with the talent they have right now, and I'm a little surprised they didn't go out and make a move for Amari Cooper or another receiver at this point, especially with how cheap Cooper was. And I know he'd been playing like dog shit, but he was in hell, I can tell you that, and you can go back to listen to some of our Browns offseason preview, and that relationship had diminished between Cooper and Watson. Neither here nor there. I think if you're looking at a couple paths, and there aren't many, so this will be somewhat short, you got to rely on that trio inside of Creed Humphrey and Trey and Tooney to run right at the 49ers defense. It's one of those paths. We know Hardgrave is out. Both Jordan Elliott and Malik Collins are battling through knee injuries on the inside of that defensive line for the 49ers. You mentioned Malik Collins' DNP yesterday. The other path is is something we've talked about a couple times as we break down these 49ers games, and it's picking on Devondre Campbell and Flanagan Fowles in coverage with tight ends and receivers in the slot. And that duo has given up 30 receptions on 33 targets for over 10 yards per target. So you really want to use some of your bigger receivers, your tight ends, some of your larger slot receivers, and get them matched up on Campbell and Flanagan Fowles. Juju certainly isn't in his prime. He's not going to have a repeat game like New Orleans, but he did lead the team in target share. The last time he was, over here in Kansas City in 2022, he was a target share monster. We saw Xavier Worthy's usage grow pre-bye week. You'd expect that to continue post-bye for a young rookie being able to absorb more during this part of the season. Travis Kelce, who you hinted at, his usage rate has ticked up without Rashee Rice. Let's see what that looks like if Fred Warner is going to be the main man in coverage there, or if they're just going to say, hey, at this point in time of Travis Kelce's career, we don't think we want to allocate Fred Warner to that, to taking Travis Kelce out. We want him to kind of be roaming all over the field and just, focusing on the offense in general. We'll see what they do with that. But certainly those are the paths at this point for this offense. Could Reed and Mahomes come up with something out of the bye that we can't envision at this point? Certainly. But those are the two, at least on paper, that would make sense for me here.
Other side of the ball, Brock Purdy and the 49ers passing attack going to have to be on point against Steve Spagnuolo and the Chiefs defense, given the fact that Kansas City has really solidified their run-stopping capabilities and the 49ers dealing with a banged-up running back room as things currently stand. But there should be a path, at least you would think, for the 49ers to be able to play a little bit of pitch and catch with their own tight end. But there are concerns, as we mentioned. Injury to Deebo Samuel, injury to Jawan Jennings. Brandon Ayuk has flashed a little bit, but hasn't exactly been the model of consistency. The other thing that kind of stands out for the 49ers is it's a lot more on Brock Purdy's plate, not getting the same run after catch that we have grown accustomed to in the past. Fascinating chess match between a Kyle Shanahan offense trying to get on track and capitalize on some of that momentum against the Seahawks versus a Chiefs team that will no doubt have a few wrinkles in store with 2 weeks to dial things up.
Yeah, I think for as much as we think about Shanahan and his sophisticated rushing attack, on paper, this is very much on Brock Purdy and the receivers. And I think you hit it perfectly in that the Chiefs have been lights out against the run this season. You have a defensive tackle in Mike Pennell, who is on pace to play substantially more snaps this season than last. Leo Chenal was the guy this organization chose to say, hey, he's going to be our guy. And we let other linebackers walk in free agency. Leo Chenal has been a run-stopping and tackling machine. Top 10 backer against the run with a 5% missed tackle rate. So that those two gentlemen, in conjunction with a few other things, is why this Chiefs defense has been stout against the run. CMC obviously still out. Jordan Mason has been a fine replacement as a runner. He's battling through the shoulder injury that knocked him out against Seattle. He's practicing, but doing so without contact. This is very much going to be a pain tolerance thing for Jordan Mason this week. And you have to remember, right? Spags and a lesser Chiefs run defense really stifled CMC and Shanahan in the Super Bowl last year on the ground. I know it was more of an accumulation of rushing yards, but it was 3.6 a carry. There wasn't anything outrageously explosive. There wasn't any game-changing runs. This year, the Chiefs are 7th in EPA per rush allowed, 2nd in schedule-adjusted rush efficiency, 2nd in yards per rush allowed to running backs. And the Chiefs have faced a really, really strong schedule of backs, right? It's Derrick Henry, it's Bijan, it's Kamara during his resurgence, it's Dobbins, who's been very good and hot to start the season. So if Mason can't go or he exits early after getting popped on the shoulder, it's basically Isaac Guerendo, who was not overly efficient last week. He just kind of hit that massive explosive towards the end of the game that distorts a lot of his production, but down prior to that, it wasn't very good.
He wasn't efficient at either stop in college either, for a guy that we watch at Wisconsin, at Louisville, and a couple stops along the way.
When you think about his size and speed combination, it's super appealing. Like, I see why he's getting a crack, And in that outside zone scheme, you're not asking him to be like shifty. You just hit the outside one cut and use that speed. So, I could see why he's appealing to Kyle Shanahan in that scheme. Again, it just feels like it's on Brock Purdy, and more has been put on his plate this season. And he's excelled despite, linemen and receivers and running backs being injured. And, he's kind of thriving in this messy environment. And we mentioned, I think last week ahead of our breakdown that, the rate of drives entering the red zone had actually been better this season than last for the 49ers. And, 49ers made a bunch of trips down there again against Seattle. But this is certainly a little bit of a step up in class. I do think Kansas City could be more vulnerable through the air than some of the metrics maybe indicate on the surface.
You took me right where I was going to go, and I was going to ask you about that, given the strength of schedule they faced at the time that they have faced those offenses, not the way they're all currently constructed as we sit here heading into Week 7.
So, the Ravens right now do have the number one offense in the NFL, but there were some question marks with their O-line heading into that game, and the Ravens did have an output where their passing offense had the third best EPA per dropback week 1 when they faced the Chiefs. Week 2, Burrow and the Bengals delivered the 6th best dropback success rate. It was more of a tight end predicated throw game with T. Higgins down. And then week 3, Atlanta had the 7th best dropback success rate of the week. And the last 2 games, the Chiefs defense has faced a hobbled Justin Herbert playing through a high ankle sprain, and that pass catching group certainly is probably, and this is being super kind, bottom 10 in the league. And
that's overly generous out of you. Nice things said about the Chargers receiving room.
And then we talked earlier about the beaten and battered Saints offense. I know Snead is having a horrific season in that Titans scheme, but I do think this Chiefs secondary just might be a little bit more vulnerable than perception. I'm sure Spags will have watched days of film from the Super Bowl and see his defense was actually more successful when it didn't blitz Brock Purdy, and Spags has actually dialed back the blitz rate on dropbacks this season, so maybe that's what we can expect here. Kittle should show extremely well in this spot. Tight ends have been doing a ton of damage against this Chiefs defense. Over 30% of the targets the Chiefs have faced this season have come from the tight end position, so Kittle has a real opportunity here to be more involved, especially if you're looking for some of those shorter throws if the ground game doesn't get going. So I think there's certainly some paths here for the 49ers offense.
Sports Talk radio question that I have to ask you because I know you love these. Of the 3 big games that we broke down, we have Sunday Night Football still to go. Which is the most...
That's really a big game.
What'd you say?
That's not really.
No, it'll take us about 37 seconds to get through it. Which is the most intriguing for you? Is it the Green Bay Packers, Houston Texans, given the variance? Is it the Lions and Vikings to see how those teams will match wits with one another, or the rematch that we just talked about?
I said at the top I thought it was Houston and Green Bay just because you're trying to figure out if those teams can join the pantheon of the top-tier teams and actually make a run towards the end of the season towards the Super Bowl. So that... And there's just been a lot of inconsistency from game to game from those teams. So you kind of want to see which one can put together the consistent effort. Obviously, Detroit and Minnesota is a fun one as they battle for first place in that division. I'll just be candid. We went over 10.5 on the Detroit Lions, and I'm not saying I'm nervous yet where they're currently situated. We are ahead of the game, certainly. But that loss to Aiden Hutchinson is a big one. Some of those guys need to start getting back along that defensive line. I think the organization, if they really want to compete for their largest goal, needs to go out and make a move here. And I think, the conversation surrounding Max Crosby is certainly interesting because, you don't want to leverage the future of your franchise grabbing a guy who's making, $100 million and have to give up, first round picks to also obtain. But I don't know how many chances Detroit's going to get at these runs, with Goff at quarterback. And so the other aspect is the first round pick that you might actually have to surrender here to go get a key cog. Based upon where your team's going to be, it would be in the latter stage of round 1. It's not like you're giving up a top 5 pick or a top 10 pick, right? Detroit's going to be picking way late in round 1. So I don't know. Kansas City, San Francisco, to me,
seen it before?
It's 2 teams that we've seen it before, and you say to yourself, hey, these guys are probably going to figure it out. We might see these guys later on in the season again, potentially. And so it loses a little bit of its luster. So it's actually the first two games there between Detroit and Minnesota and Houston and Green Bay that I'm certainly looking a little bit more forward to.
That is a fair way to look at it for sure when we try and identify some of these data points and who these teams are going to be. You mentioned the potential of Max Crosby leaving town. Wouldn't that be ironic, knowing that he said he wanted to be traded if the Raiders didn't retain Antonio Pierce, and here the Raiders are.
I think there's been some smarter people that have gotten to his brain.
There is no doubt about it, and we can talk about Antonio Pierce's off-field escapades and where he spends his time that may be better suited to try and get the team wins and losses. But again, different discussion for a different day for the Silver and Black, who do not make the big game breakdown.
I mean, it was a clown move from the onset. I love Mark Davis. Like, that's my guy.
You still have to make smart football decisions.
Yeah. He inquires help from very smart people in trying to help make some of these decisions, but he is a guy that is too trusting. And so when he sits down and has these interviews with these guys, they just sell him a bill of fucking goods. And because he's so trusting and because he's like super, super nice, like it's just the last two hires, he's been informed that they were disastrous, and he's made them anyway. So
Mark needs to run
hopefully it gets turned around.
He needs to run the Raiders the same way that he runs his WNBA franchise that won back-to-back titles with one of the best rosters and coach combinations in the league. Steelers, Jets, Sunday Night Football. Yet again, we get to see the glorious New York Jets in the limelight of prime time, this time as short road favorites for their trip to the Steel City. Jets 1.5 to 2. They did take a little bit of money against them early on a Thursday morning. Total on this game, 38 we'll call the consensus, but there are still plenty of 39s throughout the market as well. These two teams, the Jets, big news earlier this week, they acquired Davante Adams because everybody knew the only thing the Jets were missing from that roster was a receiver to pair opposite Garrett Wilson. Mike Tomlin, meanwhile, been extremely coy about who the Steelers will start at quarterback this week. Most signs point to Russell Wilson making his team debut instead of Justin Fields. The Jets and Giants, a great stat that was circulating out there on social media, a robust 4-31, two franchises in New York when they play night games since 2019. We'll see if the Jets can shed some of that stigma this week as those two combined to go 0-2 last week. Meanwhile, Russell Wilson has been a winner when his teams are listed in that home underdog role. 8-5 straight up, the 13 times we've seen it happen in multiple stops, 10-3 against the number. Sixth highest point differential in the NFL this season for the Steelers, Payne, and I don't even have them barely inside the top 20 with that current roster and the way it's constructed at this point. One matchup that you're looking for, and of course, some overarching thoughts on the Jets acquiring Davante Adams earlier this week.
Ooh, good question there. I think there's a lot of moving parts in this game. Davante Adams, to me, is probably the better receiver than Amari Cooper at this point in time. However, when you factor in cost of doing business, when you think about where those two teams are potentially moving forward, it feels like the better, more pragmatic move was actually the one Buffalo executed. And this just feels like a Hail Mary for the Jets.
I see what you did there.
Maybe.
Well played. Well played indeed, my friend.
Legitimately, it's a Hail Mary. Like, you are 2-4 at this point, and you're adding a wide receiver to the roster when, at this point, the offensive line has not played to the level you thought it would. The defensive line is continuing to get pressure, but you can just bully them right in the trenches. You probably would have been better, and you probably could have spent less money and less draft capital, plugging holes with two defensive tackles, right? And so that might have been a better allocation of funds. Now you also run the risk of, Garrett Wilson's a young kid. He just got paid a lot of money. What if he's got two targets in a game, and what is that relationship going to look like if he's no longer the number one?
Short-sighted from the Jets.
So it felt like, hey, we knew what this was Super Bowl or bust, and now you're at 2-4, and it's like, we're trending more towards bust. We've already fired the head coach. This is the complete Hail Mary.
Hassan Reddick will get signed on Monday for a lifetime deal too. The Jets will need another splash if they lose again.
So, that from that point of view, now you go out and win this week. Everyone's thinking Super Bowl, right? It's the New York mentality. So, let's get to this game. I mean, there's so many moving parts, right? I mean, it seems like Russell Wilson making his first start. Is that kind of what we're expecting at this point?
I think we have to work under that assumption, quite honestly.
He's going to be dealing with a third-string center and a backup right guard.
Good thing he's got mobility.
It's not the exact rotation Pittsburgh wanted at tackle coming into the season either, with some of those injuries. Right now, the Steelers are 24th in pass block win rate. The Jets got pressure again Monday night, 5th in pressure rate. So Russ in his first start in a new scheme, who did not play much during the preseason with the calf injury and missed starters reps in camp and missed lots of preseason games, was getting backup reps just last week running with the twos. How acclimated is he going to be? And, Pittsburgh is going to try and run the ball here. That's the clear path against this Jets defense. We just saw it on Monday night again, and now the Jets are on a short week, and the travel situation maybe is causing some fatigue going from London to, no bye week after London to then division game on Monday night, short week. So the path is going to be attempting to run the ball here, but Pittsburgh struggled with that beat-up offensive line. It just feels like we're going to get a rusty Russell Wilson here. On the other side, defensively, the Steelers use a ton of cover 3. Rodgers has been the 6th worst QB versus that coverage. But at the same time, you certainly question Pittsburgh's strength of schedule. I mean, they have not played a living, breathing... you look at the schedule. I mean, it's great that they're 4-2, and Steelers fans are happy, and they're chuckling that pro bettors who went under 8.5 wins are potentially up against it. But I mean, it's Bo Nix, it's Justin Herbert with a high ankle sprain. I mean, it's the Falcons, who are trending extremely well, but we're not at their current position week 1. It's a beat up Dallas team who you had no success against, and you just watched the Lions go up and down the field. It's the Raiders team, which is just completely dismantled and disheveled. It's a beat up Colts team. I mean, Pittsburgh has not played a team with a pulse. And when they've played them, they've been at their virtual worst. So this is certainly a little bit of a step up in class. Now you get to the price point.
I'm impressed you're calling the Jets a team with a pulse, by the way. So kudos to you for doing that.
I mean, there's talent.
Yes, they're talent. They're
right?
capable.
I mean,
they probably win on Monday night against the
Yeah.
Bills if they're able to make a field goal or two.
Yeah, I agree. Now, obviously, the Hail Mary distorted some of the down-to-down
Very
stuff.
true.
It was a coin flip, but certainly the Jets absolutely could have won that game. And so I think the Jets are better with the talent-wise, the upper echelon guys, compared to what's, Pittsburgh's faced to this point. But am I running to lay 2.5 on the road with the Jets? No. So, effectively what this line is saying is that the Jets are 5.5 on a neutral against the Cowboys. And it's I don't know if I get there, even with the Cowboys being an abject disaster. So if you want to back the Jets, it's certainly costing you a premium at this very point. So that's where it's become difficult. And so what we have seen to this part in the week, those that got out ahead are probably liking their Jets plus 1.5 ticket. Those who are and now you can include Pittsburgh in some of those advantage teasers, getting them through the 3 and the 7 with the total at 38.5. That's been the other path. So we've had a little bit of a differing mindset, although the mechanics have been a little bit different to this point.
And we come full circle to where we started this very fine show with a road favorite in prime time, all being determined on price, which provides the great equalizer in this racket, especially a betting market like the NFL that is as efficient comes in terms of domestic sports. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, best bet time for us to get that proverbial monkey off our back 6 weeks into the season.
Yeah, we talked a little bit, and why we're a little late on recording is we've tossed around a few games. There's some injuries out there, a couple pieces of information that we are waiting on. The best bets results have not been there, as I alluded to last week. Still love the process. Still know we have an edge, right? Again, we don't need to revisit the games because there's a very, very strong chance we should be better than 0-6. Let's just put it that way. But even at 0-5, you can give out a game and have it close 4 points in your favor. Just gives you an idea of when we're dealing with small sample sizes, the edge that we do actually have, despite what some will tell you. Within that, let's kind of pause on the best bet till we get a little bit more information on two games that we're kind of circling in on. I will we'll request that you go to the website bettheboardpodcast.com. You will see the NFL podcast atop the page, and just click that, and a best bet will at some point be there. Is it 12 hours from now? Is it an hour and 22 minutes before kickoff on Sunday? That I do not know, but eventually one will go up there, so no need to ask. Just make sure you are checking periodically there.
That works. Sounds like a good game plan, and I'll make sure that the NFL podcast is bumped up to the front of the page on Sunday.
Okay, that's right. You got NASCAR.
Yeah, ahead of our NASCAR show. So we'll tinker with the timestamps a little bit and get creative there so people don't have to poke around too far to try and identify that. Anything else that you would like to share as it pertains to NFL Week 7, life advice, nutritional tips, or anything else?
We're gonna be like basically an hour and 10 minutes here, which is surprising. Based upon how we thought this would maybe go. But these games were fun to discuss. So check back on the old website, bettheboardpodcast.com, and there will be something up there at some point before these games kick off on Sunday.
That is indeed the case, and we'll be back with you on Monday as well. A pair of Monday Night Football games headlined, I should say, by the Baltimore Ravens, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We'll, of course, have prop breakdowns from Billy to try and get you to the window on those two games as well. The NFL beat stops for no one, and we're here with you every step of the way until they hand out the Lombardi Trophy. So for Payne Insider, I'm Todd Fuhrman. Best of luck with all of your NFL Week 7 investments, and come Sunday afternoon or evening with a bet to be determined. We'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.